Imagine if Amazon had a private army. Imagine if Google could legally execute people. Imagine if Apple didn't just sell iPhones, but conquered entire nations to force you to buy them. Sounds like a dystopian sci-fi movie? No. This actually happened 400 years ago. The most dangerous empire in history wasn't a country, it was a startup. We are not talking about the Baghdad Railway or Napoleon's wars today. We are talking about what happens when you combine Google, Apple, and BlackRock, give them nuclear weapons, and grant them the legal authority to plunder a continent. Today we are talking about the East India Company. And if you look closely, you can see their ghosts still walking the corridors of Wall Street, Davos meetings, and tech boardrooms today. In school, they showed you that glorious map of the British Empire, the one where the sun never sets. They told you stories of queens, kings, and the white man's burden. They told you that India was the jewel in the crown. These are fairy tales told to put children to sleep, because the British state did not conquer India. The Royal Army did not invade it. India was conquered by a group of merchants gathering in a damp, narrow building on Leadenhall Street in London. This was not an invasion. This was the largest, bloodiest, and most successful hostile takeover in history. It didn't start with a gun. It started with a piece of paper. December 31st, 1600. Queen Elizabeth I signed a parchment, the Royal Charter. This paper gave a monopoly to a group of London speculators for everything east of the Cape of Good Hope. Back then, trade wasn't done with friendly handshakes. Trade was a war of logistics. Geography is a ruthless teacher. Look at the map. It took months for a ship to sail from London to India. Winds, currents, disease, and pirates. This wasn't a shipping problem, it was a math problem. Outfitting a ship was so expensive, the risk so high, that no single merchant could afford it. They had to spread the risk. Thus that cursed invention that would change human history was born. The joint stock company. Investors pooled their money. Their liability was limited, but their profits were unlimited. What was their target? Gold? Land? No. Their target was a dry, wrinkled black seed. Pepper. That black dust on your table today was the oil of the 17th century. In a world without refrigerators, preserving meat meant surviving the winter. And whoever controlled the flow of pepper controlled the stomach of Europe. The company looked innocent at first. A few ships, a few warehouses, some spice. But behind the invisible hand of the market always hides the iron fist of the company. The executives looked at the map. To the east in the Spice Islands were the Dutch, who had brutally expelled the British. To the west were the Portuguese. There was only one place left to go, India. This wasn't a choice. It was a geographical necessity. The company stepped onto Indian shores not as a conqueror, but as a beggar. Standing before the magnificence of the Mughal Empire, the British were like barbarians waiting at the palace gates in dusty boots. At that time, the Mughal Empire produced 25% of the world's GDP. Britain produced only 2%. When Emperor Jahangir gave them permission to build a small factory in the port of Surat, he didn't know he was signing his own death warrant, because in the language of the company, a factory wasn't a place of production. A factory was a fortress, where weapons were stored, soldiers were trained, agents were housed, and the lifeblood of the local economy was drained. The Trojan horse wasn't made of wood, the Trojan horse was a trade treaty. By 1750, a lethal mutation occurred in the nature of the company. Mughal authority in India was crumbling. What happens when central authority collapses? A power vacuum. And by the laws of physics, politics abhors a vacuum. The company realized that trading was too expensive. Bargaining for goods, paying customs, competing, these were inefficiencies that lowered profit margins. A merchant wants to buy cheap. A gangster wants it for free. One executive in London proposed a simple, terrifying idea to the board. Why are we buying the spice? Why don't we just buy the land the spice grows on? Enter Robert Clive. Clive wasn't a soldier. He was a salaried employee of the company, an accountant. He was a sociopath, but he was also a financial genius. Clive knew that war wasn't a matter of honor. It was a transaction. 1757, the Battle of Plassey. History books record this as a victory of British military genius. That is a lie. Robert Clive didn't fight the Nawab of Bengal's army. Months before the battle, Clive bought the Nawab's commander-in-chief, Mir Jafar. He cut deals with the Jagat Seths, the biggest Indian bankers of the era. He promised them trade privileges in exchange for a regime change. More gold was spent at the Battle of Plassey than bullets fired. The war was theater. The result had been decided in the accounting ledgers months ago. When the dust settled, the company was promoted overnight from merchant to sovereign. But this was a strange sovereignty. The company acquired the Diwani rights of Bengal, the right to collect taxes. Think about it. A company traded on the London Stock Exchange buying the IRS of Texas. The company no longer made money by selling goods. It made money by taxing your very existence. The wealth of Bengal turned into a river flowing to London. But this river didn't carry water, it carried blood. The purest, most savage, and unfiltered form of capitalism occurred in Bengal in 1770. The company management had to please their shareholders in London. The stock price was the company's only god. And this god demanded constant sacrifice. The company raised taxes in Bengal. They forced local producers to sell only to the company at prices fixed by the company. There was no free market, there was a monopsony, a single buyer. In 1769, the monsoon rains failed. The harvest was bad. Famine was at the door. What does a normal state do? It stops collecting taxes, opens the granaries, and tries to keep its people alive. Because if the people die, the state dies. But the East India Company was not a state. It was a corporation, and the duty of a corporation is not to keep humans alive. It is to maximize profit. During the famine, the company didn't lower taxes. Instead, they increased them by 10%. To meet next quarter's targets, they confiscated the seed grain of starving peasants. They sold rice stalks on the black market at exorbitant prices. The result? The Great Bengal Famine of 1770. Estimates say 10 million people died, 1/3 of the population of Bengal. People were eating grass. Rivers were clogged with corpses. Reports of cannibalism surfaced. So, what happened in London? In the report sent to shareholders, the management noted this situation not as a humanitarian tragedy, but as labor depreciation and a temporary dip in tax revenue. That year, the company paid one of the highest dividends in its history. East India Company stocks continued to rise. Because the market does not price morality, the market prices profitability. Corpses do not appear on a balance sheet. This gives us one of history's most bitter lessons. When a corporation runs a state, the citizen is no longer a human being. The citizen is a cost item, and costs must always be minimized. Apologists for British colonialism, whenever cornered, present the same argument. But we gave them railways. We modernized India. This is the greatest illusion in history. Yes, the company and later the British Raj laid a massive railway network across India. Thousands of miles of steel lines drawn on a map with a ruler and a pen. But when you look at an engineering project, the first question you must ask is, where is this train going? Infrastructure is never neutral. Every road has an ideology. Every rail has a purpose. Indian railways were not designed to connect Indians. The company didn't care if an Indian in Bombay could visit his cousin in Calcutta. These lines were designed to transport cotton, coal, grain, and opium from the interior to the ports in the shortest possible time. Look at the map. All lines flow from raw material sources to the ports. This wasn't a transportation network. It was a massive continent-wide extraction machine. Like a vacuum cleaner, sucking the wealth of the continent and spraying it into London. Trains going down to the ports were full. Trains returning to the interior were empty, or filled with cheap textiles made in British factories. This system strangled India's own local industry. Dhaka, once the textile capital of the world, turned into a ghost town against British cloth. The legends of Indian weavers having their thumbs cut off might be exaggerations, but the economic reality was far more brutal. They were handcuffed by customs barriers and railway tariffs. It wasn't an iron silk road. It was a set of iron handcuffs. Whoever controls the road controls the life upon it. And the company controlled the veins of India. The company's greed knew no bounds. Its problem wasn't just India. It had a balance sheet problem with China too. The British public was addicted to tea. Tea was the fuel of the British working class. China had the best tea in the world. But the Chinese didn't want anything the British produced. Woolen British fabrics didn't sell in hot China. The Chinese emperor only accepted payment in silver. The company's silver reserves were melting away. The trade deficit was growing. What does a CEO do in this situation? Find a new product, a product with demand. If there is no demand, create it. The company discovered a plant grown in India, opium. This was the largest state-sponsored corporate drug trafficking operation in history. Pablo Escobar, El Chapo, they would be nothing more than interns compared to the East India Company. The company forced the production of opium on fertile farmland in Bengal. Farmers were forbidden from planting food. Then they smuggled this poison into China through subcontractors called free merchants. Millions of Chinese became addicts. The fabric of society unraveled. Families fell apart. The economy collapsed, but the balance sheets in London were fixed. Silver was now flowing from China back to Britain. Teacups were full. Shareholders were happy. When the Chinese emperor tried to stop this and burned chests of opium in Canton in 1839, what did the company do? Did they say, "They won't let us sell drugs"? No. They activated their lobbying power in London. They said, "Our freedom of free trade is being restricted, and our private property has been attacked." And they called in the Royal Navy. The Opium Wars. It's called a war, but it was an execution. The British steamship Nemesis moved up Chinese rivers and bombarded coastal cities. In the modern world, we talk about drug cartels. The East India Company was an organization that hired battleships to sell drugs, brought an empire to its knees, and took Hong Kong as a drug warehouse for war reparations. And while doing this, they never neglected to attend Sunday Mass in London churches or donate to charities. This is cynical realism. Pray on Sunday, sell poison on Monday. No bubble expands forever. The company grew so big, so complex, that it began to collapse under its own weight. By the 1850s, the company had a private army of 250,000 men, twice the size of the British state's official army. But the loyalty of these mercenaries depended not on patriotism, but on their paychecks. In 1857, a simple small object blew the whole system apart, a bullet cartridge. Rumors spread that the new Enfield rifle cartridges, which soldiers had to bite open, were greased with pig and beef fat. This was an insult, a sin for both Muslim and Hindu soldiers. But the grease wasn't the real reason. The real reason was 100 years of humiliation, exploitation, hunger, and cultural violation. The Sepoy Mutiny, or India's first war of independence, broke out. India burned. Delhi fell. British women and children were killed. The company lost control. The London Stock Exchange shook. Company shares crashed. And finally, the British state uttered that phrase we hear so often in modern history: too big to fail. If the company went under, the British banking system would go under. The prestige of the empire would vanish. In 1858, the British Parliament passed the Government of India Act. The company was nationalized. India was attached directly to the British crown. Queen Victoria was proclaimed Empress of India. The company was dissolved on paper. But did it die? No, it just changed its shell. The system the company built, the bureaucracy, the railways, the mechanisms of exploitation, continued exactly as before. Only the name on the sign changed. The CEO left. The viceroy arrived. The shareholder left. The tax collector arrived. The East India Company is the ancestor of the modern multinational corporation. A structure responsible only to its shareholders, viewing ethics merely as a PR exercise, crushing geography, laws, and people to maximize profit. This DNA was created with that parchment in 1600. Look around you today. We see private military companies replacing state armies in the Middle East and Africa. Wagner, Blackwater. These are the modern grandsons of the company's army. We see your data being processed by big tech companies, your digital identity bought and sold. This is the modern version of the tax collector in Bengal. You watch conglomerates changing laws through lobbying, causing environmental disasters, and walking away by just paying a fine. What you see isn't new. What you see is the East India Company dressed in modern clothes. The suits have changed, but the mindset is the same. Empires don't collapse the way people expect. They collapse the way people ignore. The East India Company taught us this. The greatest tyrannies don't come from a dictator's speech on a balcony. They come from a decision made by a board of directors behind closed doors, quietly, with slick logos designed by graphic artists and strictly according to the law. You don't need tanks to invade a country anymore. You just need to put it in debt, control its supply chains, and turn its elites into shareholders. Look at the map again. States may have drawn the borders, but look at who controls the pipelines, the fiber optic cables, the data centers, and the trade routes passing through those borders. There, you will see the true emperor. This is History Insight. Like and subscribe, because history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And the sound you hear right now is just a new, terrifying verse of that old rhyme.